It is my pleasure to serve as the host to this panel. I'm delighted with the panelists. These are all leaders in healthcare that have contributed significantly to the health of our society. And we will have a really important discussion about the value of our industry, the biopharmaceutical industry. Why is this discussion important? The discussion is important because for our industry to be able to deliver the value that we all have promised society, we need policies and regulatory environments that enable us to do so, that support innovation and R&D, that enable all of the patients that can benefit from our work to access medicines. It is important work, it is important value, and it is our job, all of us in the industry, with our partners that work with us on behalf of patients and consumers, to advocate, to discuss the value that we deliver. For decades, the biopharmaceutical industries, all of the companies, have worked really hard to bring health to society. Together with partners in healthcare, we have seen increasingly how life expectancy continues to increase for society, and we've seen that now for 60 years. We have also seen cancer mortality drop by 50%. And because products and medicines like the retroviral medicines, we have seen HIV death because of HIV/AIDS, drop by 79%. The work of pharmaceutical companies in the area of vaccines in the US has seen infectious diseases, 10 infectious diseases, almost eradicated, 90%. We also know that vaccines and medicines are an important part of the solution to the cost of healthcare in our country. In addition, we provide hundreds of thousands of jobs, high-paying jobs in our economy. And yet, we are continuously challenged to articulate the value that we bring. It's interesting. At GSK, the company that I'm honored to be part of, we have one goal. We aim to help people feel better, do more, and live longer. And that is a similar goal that I share with all of our colleagues and peers in the industry. All of our companies work hard to do that. We do that because we dedicate a significant amount of our lives to discovering, developing, manufacturing with quality, and delivering with integrity information on medicines that are desperately needed by all of us. That's what we dedicate our lives to. And again, we are challenged to discuss the value that we bring. It's a simple proposition. We work hard to bring medicines. It sounds simple. But the biopharmaceutical sector is quite complex. Perhaps one of the more complex endeavors that any one of us could be involved in. Good work, noble work, but hard work. To get a medicine to the hands of a patient, it takes hundreds of man-hours and woman-hours. It takes hundreds of millions of dollars, on average a decade. And we fail more often than we succeed. It takes a lot of strong spirit and heart to participate in this industry. Hopefully with partners and with the help of the FDA, we can change that so we can bring medicines faster to the hands of those that need it. PhRMA, our trade association, has begun an initiative to communicate the value that we deliver, the work that we do. We call it From Hope to Cures. I think it's a very apropos name for the campaign, because that's what we dedicate our lives to do. We work really hard to bring hope, and we hope ourselves to bring cures. I invite you to visit that website and get the information of all the work that the biopharmaceutical industry does on behalf of patients. But campaigns, no matter how loud, how large, how much money we spend, cannot convey, from my perspective, the skill, the passion, the commitment, the long hours that my colleagues, my teammates, and my peers in this industry put day in and day out so that we can bring hope, medicine, life, quality of life, health to others. Campaigns can't do that. It has to be the voice of the people that are working so hard on bringing these medicines, and the voice of those of us that benefit from that work. And that's why I'm delighted to have this panel this morning, because we get to hear those voices. Healthcare is an extraordinary industry to be part of. I have spent 30 years in this industry. I'm privileged to have spent 30 years in this industry. I started my career as a sales representative in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where I was born and raised. And I currently serve as president of GlaxoSmithKline. Every day that I go to work, and I have gone to work, and I spent 25 years at a sister company, Eli Lilly, 25 great years. Every day that I go to work, I know that I and my teammates make a difference. I see it. When I ride with sales representatives, I visit offices of physicians that are working so hard to take care of their patients and invite us, pharmaceutical companies, to help them. So then why? Why are we always challenged to talk about the value we bring? That's what I would love to have all of us discuss this morning. And I thank you all for being here. My panelists, and I'm very, very grateful and proud to have all of you be part of this conversation. I'm going to say and introduce you, and then I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and speak a little bit about what you do and discuss our first question. But before we do that, Dr. Samantha Budd, Vice President, Neurosciences, iMed, AstraZeneca R&D. Dr. Leonard Lichtenfeld, Deputy Chief Medical Officer, American Cancer Society. Jennifer McCafferty, Vice President, Consumer Healthcare Supply Chain Improvement Program, Global Manufacturing and Supply, one of my teammates at GSK. Jessica Malore, Public Health Advocate. Ken Thorpe, Chairman, Partnership to Fight Chronic Diseases. So to get started and begin, let me ask panelists, and I'll ask you again, to briefly introduce yourself and answer the following question, and we'll do it one by one. What does biopharmaceutical innovation mean to you? Jessica, could you please kick the discussion off?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say what an honor it is for me to be here today among all of you, because the work that you're doing every day has made such a difference in my life and the lives of so many patients who I'm representing today. I would not be alive if it weren't for research and innovation. Almost 16 years ago, I was 16 years old. I was a senior in high school, co-captained my tennis team with no history of any prior medical problems. And one night I had a sudden, massive heart attack and wasn't expected to live through the night. A blood clot had gotten lodged in the artery leading to the left side of my heart and was completely blocking all blood flow. The doctors still don't know what caused the clot. It wasn't cholesterol related. I didn't drink or smoke or do drugs. But they took me to 3 hospitals that night in hopes of having a heart transplant as my last resort. And because there's such a critical shortage of organ donors in this country, no hearts could save me at the time. But fortunately, there was a then experimental heart assist device known as the LVAD, which stands for left ventricular assist device, At the time, it was about the size of a large donut, and it was implanted in my abdomen. It had 2 tubes that connected to the left side of my heart and pumped for the left side because that was destroyed by the clot. But I was the last person in the study before it got FDA approved, and the technology had only been perfected 5 years earlier. So I think, if this had happened 5 years earlier, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Not only did that device buy me time while I waited for a heart transplant, but it allowed me to maintain a somewhat normal life while I waited. I returned to school. I was in the school musical. I went to the prom. I went on a choir trip to Disney World, and all of those things greatly enhanced my quality of life. The same week of my heart attack, because of complications and the threat of infection, my left leg had to be amputated just above the knee. And if you want to talk about biomechanics, my prosthetic leg, I had to relearn how to walk. But this leg not only allows me to walk, but it allows me to dance and to zip line through the jungles of Costa Rica and visit, the Great Wall of China and take the New York City subway system, as glorious as it is. I waited 9 long months for a heart transplant. And then a few days before high school graduation, I got the call that would save my life. And for the past 15 years, it's those heart transplant medications that have kept my heart healthy and kept me alive and allowed me to have this full and active life. They enabled me to attend Princeton University on time 3 months later. And I had a wonderful freshman year. But then the summer after freshman year, it was the 4th of July, I was sitting on my parents' couch, and all of a sudden my fingers brushed against a lump. We took a biopsy, and my worst fears were confirmed. I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer of the lymph nodes, one of the leading causes of death among adolescents. The cancer was caused because of the Epstein-Barr virus. Because I was too immunosuppressed at the time, it allowed the EBV virus to become active in my system and to mutate the cells. So I was diagnosed with large B-cell lymphoma. I went to see an oncologist, and the first thing that she did when I entered the room was hand me a box of tissues. And she said, "Here, I make a lot of people cry in this room. I'm sorry you have to be here." She went on to tell me that the cancer was treatable, but not necessarily curable, and started talking about quality of life. I fortunately decided to get a second opinion, and my doctor said that with chemotherapy, he thought that there was a reasonable thought that it could be cured. So 2 weeks before the start of my sophomore year at Princeton, I had my first round of outpatient chemotherapy, once again turning to medication to save my life. And within 3 months, I underwent CHOP therapy along with Rituxan, which was a targeted therapy with minimal side effects for me. Within 3 months, I was in remission. 6.5 years later, I was again diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, this time Burkitt's. Because it was a different pathology, it wasn't considered a relapse, which was a very good thing, but I had to do inpatient chemotherapy, this time with EPOC and intrathecal methotrexate. But I'm now celebrating 5 years in remission as of January 2008, and my doctors are very optimistic about my prognosis. I just feel so fortunate to be living in this age where there is such a drive for research and innovation, and to have access to these treatments. My lifespan has literally doubled as of this year when I turned 32, from that night when I was 16 and wasn't expected to live through the night. Research and innovation gives hope to people at their darkest hour, and I've met so many of them through my public speaking and through my advocacy work, and I want to do whatever I can to advocate on behalf of them so that they have the access and the benefits that I receive, that will continue to strive to find these innovations for them, because it's that hope, that promise of a cure or a better quality of life that can make all the difference in the world. It can, encourage them to wake up every day, to have that strength to keep going on, and to keep fighting the diseases that threaten their lives. So thank you again for all the work that you do.
Thank you. Samantha?
So, thank you, Deirdre. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? It's hard to tell from here. So I'm Samantha Budd, and I work for AstraZeneca, which I have done so for 14 years now. I'm a biochemist by training, and I have a doctorate in neurochemistry. I have been involved in my years in AstraZeneca in both the discovery of new drugs, the preparation of those molecules as they go into the clinical setting, and today I lead global clinical trials in an area close to my heart, which is Alzheimer's disease. These are large, complex studies to conduct, and I think we just heard from Deirdre about that we work very hard to make these things happen. I have a very talented team of individuals helping me do this, obviously, and they work incredibly hard and are so motivated. But the question you ask of what does biopharmaceutical innovation mean to me it's pushing back the boundaries of science to bring forward new medicines to improve people's lives. I mean, we've just heard a fabulous example of Jessica's life being dependent upon, not just improved in a small way. And that required several pieces of innovation, not just the medicines, but we also heard about biophysics being involved there. So innovation to me is the multiple pieces needed to bring forward a new treatment. And I'm very inspired to work in pharmaceutical industry because it's actually an extreme team sport. There are so many disciplines needed to bring forward a new treatment to market. I actually couldn't name them, and I'd love to meet the CEO of a pharmaceutical company who could list them all, because there are literally thousands of them. And I think it's a little bit of a misnomer of the, TV show Third Rock from the Sun. It's not one person in a lab. We have to make sure that society knows just how many different roles this takes. Deirdre, you talked about 10 years in development time. That's in development. You need to discover the molecule prior to that as well. The molecule that I'm working on took 13 years to discover. And that's not unusual when you are so determined to work on a particular disease state and you've made continuous breakthroughs. So that's what inspires me, is the team effort, but it's the motivation of what it achieves for society.
Thank you, Samantha. Leonard, would you like?
Thanks, Deirdre. I'm Len Lichtenfeld, and I am Deputy Chief Medical Officer of the American Cancer Society, and I have been honored and privileged to work for the Society for the past 13 years. I have a background as a physician in private practice, both with respect to medical oncology and primary care internal medicine, and a couple of other things that we don't need to get into here, but also items that do influence my worldview. I've had a substantial experience in a number of areas of medical policy and practice, including physician payment and regulation and legislation and so forth. I have to share with you that I also have the privilege of the gray hair. Those of you who may have heard me before. And what that means is I've been around I've been around for a long time. That's what it means, but I've been around medical oncology, cancer care, cancer research for over 40 years. And it's that perspective that when I have an opportunity to talk to audiences like yourselves and others as well, that I think it's so important that we bear in mind, because I think it really influences the thought of where we are today and where we're headed, and some of the, shall we say, some of the struggles that people face. I'm going to take the liberty of the hope and cure phrase, and I don't want to be impolite when I say this. But I have a phrase that I use, and unfortunately it was the hope and the hype. The other phrase I use is the Moses factor, and I'll explain that. You might get an idea from the 40 years of wandering in the desert sort of thing to get a picture of where I saw the world and where I see the world. And a lot of where I see the world today is no question has to do with biopharmaceutical innovations and scientific innovations as well. And the point that Samantha made was absolutely critically important. So I came from a world where somebody happened to show the cover and reminded me about this, of a Time magazine cover, and I looked it up. It was 1972, and it had a highly regarded, outstanding, world-class immunologist on the cover. And the body of the article, which is, you go on the internet and get it, was really about how immunotherapy was going to change the world. And the reason I'm so familiar with that is because that is where I actually started what little bit of research work that I did. We struggled, as many of you in this room know, we struggled for an incredibly long period of time to take the opportunity to understand, not only understand the immune system, but to actually take that information and turn it into therapeutically viable medications. So when I treated melanoma back at the National Cancer Institute in 1972 and 1973, we had a drug called dacarbazine, that some of you may know, DTIC. And when I sat at ASCO about 5 years ago, as best I recall, a panel of experts got up there in front of that room and said, we're in serious trouble because we're still using the same drugs we've been using for the last 35, 40 years, and dacarbazine was still a mainstay of treatment, and unfortunately still is a mainstay of treatment in this country. But then last year at ASCO, you go into a room, and some of you may well be familiar with this, you go into a lecture hall that is now filled with people, and somebody stands there, an expert stands there, and says over 60%, we anticipate that over 60% of the people with advanced melanoma will have durable, long-term remissions. And all of that has made its way into the marketplace, not the research place, but the marketplace in the past several years to get to that point. That is a stunning, stunning observation. I only hope it's true. I also remember 2 years ago in this city in Washington, the Institute of Medicine convened a panel talking about genomics, and I learned a new word that day that you all, again, many of you are familiar with, called Pharmageddon. I was so impressed with the word Pharmageddon, I went back and I wrote a blog about it. I said, wow, that's really impressive. And then I learned another that was called Eroom's Law, which you may know, which was Moore's Law spelled backwards, as in the chip industry, and constantly putting more power on the chip, reducing the cost of the chip every so many months. And Eroom's Law, which is what these folks were saying, the expenses of developing these medications were going up so rapidly that they were prohibitive, and they sounded prohibitive. That lecture was followed by somebody giving a presentation on vemurafenib, which you may know is a drug that was one of the first drugs that came out that is effective in melanoma. And that expert got up there and showed the slides on vemurafenib, which was absolutely, the results that were the beginning, early reports of those results had just come out. And it was stunning. So I ended up in a situation where I was in conflict. And I wrote about it because I said, I don't know who's going to prevail, but I'm an eternal optimist. I will tell you, that was 2 years ago. And now I'm reading articles about there are 1,000 medications in the pipeline for cancer that we have, and I sit at the table where we have to develop new protocols to try to speed this through. You, again, know about the clinical trial situation. I sit at other tables where I try to figure out how we're going to pay for this and new payment models, and we might talk about that later. And I sit at other tables that talk about how we're going to reform, the care of cancer patients, remembering that the patient is really the center of our interests, but how we get there, how we get the care to that patient is so critically important. And then I sit at another room where we try to figure out how we're going to get enough money for basic scientists to be trained in this country, so we don't have I don't mean to be dramatic. I've heard a Nobel Prize laureate say this, the complete collapse of our fundamental scientific infrastructure in this country because we're not training new minds. We at the American Cancer Society have been fortunate to have supported 47 Nobel laureates early in their careers. And I hope over the next 100 years, it didn't take us 100 years to get there, it took us about 50 or so years to get there, but I hope over the next 50 years we have another 47. And it's not just us. It's obviously much larger than us. It's you. It's the federal support for research. It's making sure we have payment models that work, that we have care models that work, that we give you the opportunity to take your innovations and make them work. At almost the tipping point, the perfect storm, the balances between the barriers, as you mentioned, Deirdre, and the opportunities and the successes. That's what keeps me going. Won't be for another 40 years, I don't think. But I promise you, just as you all mentioned, you wake up every day, and certainly, the patients who we care for, the people we care for, It's so important to remember that. You wake up every day and you say, wow, where we have been, where we are, but even more where we're going to be. Just a stunning opportunity, a stunning time to be involved in cancer care, a stunning opportunity to be involved in seeing what new opportunities you all bring for the care of our patients to improve the quality of their life and the length of their days. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonard. Before I ask Jennifer to comment, I'm going to, with your indulgence, walk around because all of you are kind of stressing. I was told to be Charlie Rose, but it's not going to work. I think I need to become a little bit more Oprah this time. So I'll stand over here with your permission. Jennifer, would you like to comment from your perspective?
It's a pleasure to be here today. My name's Jennifer McCafferty. I work at GSK in the manufacturing division. We've heard a lot from our scientists on the panel. I'm also a scientist. I have a Ph.D. in analytical chemistry, and I'm one of those kids that got turned on to science because of curiosity and an excellent teacher who turned me on to how fun science could be, and that's one of my passions that we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. I also spent 12 years with Merck & Company, also a pharma member company, and was privileged to contribute there to new product introduction for a number of drugs. I work in the supply chain, which means that I work very closely with our manufacturing facilities, both within GSK and also in the external network, to assure that we are manufacturing our discovered medicines and vaccines to the utmost quality standard. I've spent a lot of my years in the quality organization, take a lot of pride in the products that we make every day. And one of the real imperatives that we have in the pharmaceutical industry is the need for people who have STEM backgrounds. There is a deficit that we project in our country of people who have the skill sets that we need in order to deliver the kind of innovations and even to have very talented manufacturing operators in our facilities. So what pharmaceutical innovation means to me, having spent a good deal of time at the research manufacturing interface, is the opportunities to bring new medicines to people every decade, and we've seen extreme advances. But one of the things that really inspires me, I've done a lot of work in the developing markets, and what I've seen is medicines that we may have discovered 20, 30 years ago. For example, some of our core antibiotics that came out of the pharma industry are the ones that are most in demand around the world. So it is around discovery and bringing new medicines to cure new diseases, but it's also about access to medicines. How can we get the things that are already in our toolkit, where people in countries far from these shores are dying each day? How can we work with governments, academia, foundations to bring those medicines to countries around the world? And lastly, what it means to me is I have an opportunity, being part of a wonderful ethical pharmaceutical company, to sit on a group called the U.S. Contributions Committee, where I get to hear people from across the country who run nonprofits and want GSK's help in funding the work that we do. We give hundreds of grants each year, and one of the things we've done just recently in North Carolina, we have a program that touches 10,000 students across that country, and we train up over 1,000 teachers each year to try to turn children onto science. So what it means to me is the hope of the medicines, but also the hope of inspiring a new generation into science, because we absolutely need people who are passionate, like the people I work with every day, to make the differences that are being made right now. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you, Jennifer. Ken, as chairman of an organization that fights so hard to control and perhaps continuously stem chronic disease, what is your perspective on our industry?
Well, thanks. Thanks again for putting this panel together, and thanks for inviting me and PFCD into the room. I'm chairman of the Partnership to Fight Chronic Disease. It's a group of about 80 organizations. Pharma has been our key backer and really the engine for our success over the years. But we have a wide variety of groups that have come to the table that normally don't come to the table over healthcare reform. Business groups, labor groups, patient care groups, the American Cancer Society, YMCA. It's a very eclectic group of individuals that are coming to the table to really look at how we can reform our healthcare system. No question that innovation has had an enormous impact on improving the quality and longevity of life. So Deidre mentioned one example on HIV/AIDS and on cancer. It's also had an enormous impact on reducing cardiovascular mortality over the last many years. The better use of statins, antihypertensive medications have been really at the centerpiece of driving down cardiovascular mortality. We at the PFCD sort of take a bigger systematic view of what innovation means, however. The quality piece is critical. We want to make sure that the industry is not viewed as part of the problem, but that is the engine of healthcare reform solutions. And we've been doing that by trying to frame the debate in a couple of ways. One is just by providing data on what's driving the growth in healthcare spending up. And I'm just going to take Medicare as an example. Since the mid-1980s, 94% of the growth in Medicare spending is due to an increase in the prevalence of chronic disease. Now, that's generally not part of the discussion about healthcare reform, prevention, and more effective medications and approaches for preventing disease, but is a key driver. Second is that, sticking with the Medicare theme, virtually all the spending in Medicare is linked to patients that have 4 or more chronic conditions. So just to put a clinical face on this, where all the money in our healthcare system is really linked to an overweight, hypertensive diabetic with bad cholesterol, pulmonary disease, back problems, and is depressed. All right, that's our patient. And they're on multiple medications, they're seeing multiple physicians, and for the most part, it's really poorly coordinated. High rates of readmissions, high rates of preventable hospitalizations, poor quality of care. So our take on innovation is really having a movement in 3 areas that pharma and bio is really at the centerpiece of. One is doing a better job of preventing disease in the first place. That is a major cost driver, and it's a major way that we can improve the quality of life. Second is to really have innovation in detection. We need to do a better job of earlier detection of disease so that we can intervene clinically faster and have more options. You heard a wonderful story here from Jessica on how innovation can work there. And third is we need to have better engagement of patients that have multiple chronic healthcare conditions. And really a centerpiece of that is good primary care and effective care coordination. And we view sort of the effective care coordination component really state-of-the-art medication therapy management. Really, the key to this reform debate is really interdisciplinary, team-based care that really is focusing on that whole patient, not managing the patient in silos, but really focusing on collectively the set of problems that a patient has. And a big piece of that is having effective adherence in medication therapy programs. So one of the things that we've done over the last 6 years is shift the debate away from having policymakers look at where we spend money in silos of care. So we don't want people to manage the pharma budget, hospital budget, and so on. We're really looking at, we want to manage per person spending. And we've made the case that we are really underinvesting in prescription drugs and medications to manage these chronic diseases. In fact, the main reason why drugs spending has gone up since the mid-1980s has really nothing to do with price. It has to do with this explosion in the prevalence of chronic diseases that we can largely prevent. So we really see the biopharma industry as a centerpiece for health reform, that if we're really going to think about health reform holistically, that we really need to have innovation in those 3 reform silos: better prevention, more effective and earlier detection, and particularly better engagement of chronically ill patients. That involves devices, it involves innovation in new pharmaceuticals coming on the market. That really is our long-term strategy for making programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance sustainable over time. We are not going to unit price cut our way out of this problem. At the end of the day, the only way that we can really do sustainable health reform is by pulling costs out of the system. And we think that innovation here in biopharma is really key to pulling costs out of the system that represent poor quality.
Thank you, Ken. Samantha, I have a question for you. We heard Jessica articulate so clearly the value of all the hard work that all of our scientists do for decades. What motivates you to continue to look? Because discovery is a process where we either learn where the answer is, or we also learn where the answer is not, so the next generation can then go get closer to the answer, to the truth of what we're pursuing. But it's hard work.
Yeah, thanks, Deirdre. It's very true. The phase that I work in, there are statistics that only 2% of molecules that come into clinical testing will ever become marketed products. And as we've said, that's those that reach the clinic. And prior to that, there are many more that fail ahead of that. And I've been asked many times, how do you keep up your motivation? For me, it's really simple. I work in Alzheimer's disease, and there are some great statistics produced every year by the Alzheimer's Association, and I know that Henry is here somewhere. 5.2 million Americans already have the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. 200,000 of those have a diagnosis under the age of 65. And from what we know about the disease today, there are another 15 million in North America, in the US, and not including Canada, who already have the pre-stages of disease but are not yet diagnosed. That's a very large number of individuals. The cost to society is huge. So the joint Medicaid-Medicare budget in 2013 was published last week by the Journal of New England Journal of Medicine to be $203 billion US. That's greater than the cost of many of the other diseases that we've heard talked about. Alzheimer's disease today is the 6th leading cause of death in North America. It is amongst the top 10 causes of death, the only one with no treatment that stops or slows it. Now that's a lot of statistics, and I could keep going on and on and on. I don't want to bore you. The reality is the disease is horrible. This is not grandma who forgets her car keys or forgets to buy carrots. The average time to death from diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is 8 years. And if you've ever had to deal with the care of a loved one or an extended family member with the disease, you'll know that it's truly horrible. To me, that is enormously motivating. There are unmet medical needs that have no treatments today. Unmet medical needs that affect millions of people around us. And very many people in this room will know somebody or is already taking care of a family member. That's the disease aspect. I have to confess I'm a scientist by day, so there's another aspect that really motivates me. And that is unraveling the process of disease. Why do we think we can design new treatments for Alzheimer's disease? The journey of understanding the pathophysiology and the points at which, if we intervene, will stop that disease from going forward. That motivates me as well. And on a day-to-day basis, because it's a 20-year span, so how do you keep yourself motivated daily is the one that's asked of me. Yesterday, my team got some results in. We're doing 5 clinical studies at present, and one of them read out some interim results. My clinician ran around the office like a child on Coca-Cola. He was so excited. That gets us to it. That was positive results. We also get negative results, lots of them, and setbacks. But actually they're motivating too, because you have to work it out. Is this a setback that means you stop? Or is this a setback you can problem solve through so that you can keep moving forwards towards that goal of bringing medicines for patients? So there are multiple levels of what motivates me as an individual. And we all, different things make us tick.
Now you participated in the pharma program Research Progress Hope. What made you do that?
Yeah, it's really touches a lot on what Jennifer's talking about, on inspiring young scientists, but also the misnomer and the public impression of what we do. You talked about, Deirdre, how hard we work, and I'm right in the middle of that. But I'm also aware of whenever I talk to an average person or even somebody who knows a little bit about it, or a graduate student who's considering a pharmaceutical career, what does it take? what are all the things that are needed to bring a drug forward? And back to this idea that discovery, we don't find things under a leaf. We need biochemists, physiologists, toxicologists, pharmacokineticists, medicinal chemists, formulation chemists. We need a battery of roles to be able to even pull together the discovery of a molecule. I don't like the word discovery. It does imply that you turn over a stone. It's not like that. So for me, I was motivated to show what are the bits and pieces in my day so that graduate students, when looking at this, could ask themselves, does that motivate me? And I was hoping just to display a bit of that.
Thank you. I'm sure you did, Samantha. Jessica is an extraordinary example of a fighting spirit, but also a great advocate for patients. We know that patients continuously advocate to be part, to have their voice heard by the clinicians, by research and development leaders. What do you hope to accomplish as you lead in this goal of having your voice heard?
Well, having confronted death, multiple times in my life, it's really given me just such a great appreciation for life. So my goal has always been to help others fulfill their greatest potential, but also to live the best quality of life. And so my goal is to get you the support and funding that you need to find the life-saving drug that will save the people that need it today, along with the people that will need it tomorrow and months and years from now. Our health is everything. Without it, we have nothing, and the work that you do helps us to sustain it. As the saying goes, we've come so far, but we still have a ways to go. But in reality, our work is never over. Innovation will forever be necessary. We'll continue to find cures and vaccines for the diseases that future generations will one day consider unimaginable, just as we have for many of the diseases that patients didn't stand a chance against in the past. But that's why it's so important, because we will continue to confront new diseases, and there will always be ways that we can refine our treatments and better enhance the quality of life for our patients. So I will continue to advocate on behalf of patients for research and innovation, and in return, advocate on your behalf. And I ask you to never stop fighting for the next life-saving drug, because we thrive on that hope. It's what keeps us going every day, and the work that you're doing is what has and will continue to transform our lives.
Thank you, Jessica. We will never stop fighting. Leonard, could you talk to us about this important initiative of turning the tide against cancer?
Turning the Tide Against Cancer is a coalition of organizations, a collaboration of organizations that have come together to address the opportunities, the barriers, the promise of biopharmaceuticals and personalized medicine. The primary organizations include the Personalized Medicine Coalition, Feinstein Keene Healthcare, which is a division of Ogilvy, and the American Association of Cancer Research. ACS is grateful to be part of that, and certainly have been very much a part of those discussions, as have a number of other organizations. But I would refer you, if you have interest, there is a website, turningthetideagainstcancer.org, and there's a paper that was published in Clinical Cancer Research just this past February that summarizes the thoughts of some of the thought leaders in this particular arena. But it really comes down to some of the things that I talked about before. I want to go back to that 40 years because one of the issues about the 40 years was people weren't sitting back not doing anything. They were doing a lot. There's a tremendous amount of infrastructure being developed. And I can't sit here and not acknowledge John Seffrin, who is our CEO, who has led us through the past number of years, and if you don't mind me mentioning, is now planning his retirement, which is well-deserved. But when John started as the CEO of the American Cancer Society to where we are today, every day we have 400 deaths that are averted that we had the same treatment, the same statistics, the same numbers that we had back in the early 1990s. Those are folks who would not be with us. That's every day today. And John gave us a goal a couple of years ago of achieving 1,000 deaths averted every day in this country. And we're on our way to that goal through a variety of initiatives and a variety of promises, some of which have to do with fundamental blocking and tackling, such as screening for colorectal cancer, some of which have to do with new treatments that we've been fortunate to have. But the Personalized Medicine Coalition, the Turning the Tide Against Cancer, is part of looking at that more globally, not global, but more globally at what we face. Fundamental basic research, initiatives within the biopharmaceutical area, changing clinical practice, and interestingly, changing clinical practice because, as someone did say to me a couple of months ago at a meeting, if we don't change clinical practice in oncology, we will not have the promise. We will not have the promise of these new opportunities. Looking at data in oncology, data analytics, having systems be able to talk to each other, and making sure that, number one, the opportunities that you develop have a means of getting to the patients, and also importantly that the patients have the opportunity to get to your opportunities. It's a hugely complex area. Sometimes the complexity is overwhelming because it touches so many areas, and as Ken is as well versed as anyone in this room knows how hard what a major process this is. So the hope is through collaborations like Turning the Tide Against Cancer, we can bring that message forward, and we can have thought leaders, from thought leaders to thought leaders, in an effort to try to concentrate on those areas and those issues, those complexities, to maintain this incredible opportunity that we face today.
Thank you, Leonard. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you about STEM. I mean, we hear from Samantha how much it takes, the effort, and it's not lost on any of us in this industry, of the extraordinary work that our colleagues in science do to bring us closer and closer to delivering that hope. We hear from Jessica that she wants us to continue to fight the good fight on their behalf, and we commit to that every day. But we need talent. We need that next generation of Samanthas, of Leonards, of Kens, of Jessicas to really get engaged and involved and help us find that next group of cures. And you are really involved in helping us get those new minds. Can you talk to us about the STEM program and why are you so committed to it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I grew up in upstate New York and was a child of a lot of teachers. My two parents were elementary public school educators for 33 years in New York State public schools. And almost everybody in my family was in education. So I grew up around it, going into the classrooms, as a small child. And I went on to study chemistry because, as I mentioned, I got inspired about science. And I'm generally a pretty curious person, and I wanted to learn more and just got really infected with the bug as I got into independent research. And I sat in my fourth year of college and looked around the room in my advanced physical chemistry class, the only woman in the room, really thinking I was going to go and be a high school chemistry teacher. But at that moment, in that year, really decided that I actually wanted to go on and continue my education and become a research scientist. And I don't think that was an easy journey and decision to make in experiences I'd had up to that point. And I'm so happy that I made it. And as I've gone to the pharmaceutical industry, I've spent a lot of time mentoring young new hires and helping them along their way. And about 3 years ago, I started to get involved more in the community with education. And what I learned is that a lot of our brightest and best are not choosing a field in science. They're going into finance. They're going into other fields that they feel might be more personally lucrative. And I think we haven't done a great job of telling our stories of how rewarding fields in science can be and how much of a difference we can make to people like Jessica, which is truly why people work in the pharmaceutical industry, because they're absolutely inspired by the opportunity we have. So I've gotten more involved in this, in going into the schools, particularly for elementary and middle school children who make that decision. And as much as I love the television show Big Bang Theory, I think people have this vision of what a scientist is. It's a man who works by himself in a lab and is quite quirky and fun. But we're not all that way. And I'll tell you, I go in as a mom into the classrooms. I try to go into the schools at least once a year personally, and I do a lot of other work as well. But almost every time I go in, I get a call from a parent saying, you know what, my daughter has been talking about science nonstop since you've been in the room. And you go in there, you do an experiment, and you see their eyes light up. We need more volunteers going out into the schools. We need more industry leaders like the people in this room, partnering with governments, foundations, universities, to make that early intervention at that age. We need to fund more, both, again, in the hours that we spend, but also in the opportunities we have to give back to our community to make a difference. I don't know how many of you have read the Patel report that Pharma did. It's sitting in the entrance to the social media room. I noticed it there. There's just some really compelling information there around the work that's being done. As a collective in the pharma industry, we've touched 1.6 million children, students over 5 years. We have over 10,000 volunteers out in the schools. So it means a lot to me personally, because I think we need to change the trend. We need to turn more people onto science, the brightest, the best, so they realize that it may not seem like the most financially lucrative field, despite the reputation that Big Pharma may have, but it is absolutely the most rewarding and inspiring work that I could have ever imagined being a part of. So that's the work we're doing with GSK to promote STEM in our communities.
Thank you, Jennifer. And you say that sometimes we are misunderstood and misrepresented in many forums. There are reasons for that, and I'd love to hear from Ken, if I may. What are some of the things that our industry, in your eyes, needs to do differently so that we can continue to convey the value that we deliver and help take those barriers of misinterpretation and perceptions out of the way?
Well, I think that you're in the process of doing many of them right now. And I think it's sort of a couple of things. One is that, and it's part of what we've been doing at PFCD, is that I think for years the industry's had a big target on its back in terms of public policy as a leading cost driver, a main place to go for savings, that there's too much money there, that the profits are too big, that the growth in spending is because we have these big expensive drugs. And a lot of what we've been doing is just showing that that's just patently not true. It's certainly not correct. That the key driver here and part of the solution, shouldn't be a target. You're the key to the solution because, as I mentioned, most of the growth in spending is prevalence driven, not unit price driven. So that's been an important message to get out there. That to the extent that you are out there trying to cut spending in the industry, it undermines everything we've been hearing here. It undermines innovation. It undermines our long-term ability to really control the growth in healthcare spending. A second thing, which I think has been a nice part of PFCD, is sort of part of the targeting, is that certainly there's a lot of skepticism and doubt historically in the Hill about messages coming directly from the companies. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we've been able to do is, as part of a broad-based coalition, work with members of Congress, work with the private sector, work at the state level. We've been working internationally as well on these issues. To come up with innovative solutions to some of these long-term healthcare problems. And I think to the extent that the view of the industry has shifted over time from one of essentially legislatively being a big hockey goaltender, just knocking things out of the net, to really being an engaged part of the solution and thinking through long-term structural changes in public policy, I think that that's been very, very positive. So that, I think, has changed the view of the industry as well. So, you know, framing this debate in terms of public policy has been essential. I think from, you know, having the industry to be a continued target for budget cuts, which would, as I mentioned, just really undermine everything that we need to do long term to really drive innovation, drive costs down, and have continued quality improvements.
Thank you, Ken. Leonard, I'd love to hear from you. We believe, obviously, we're all so committed to healthcare. We dedicate our lives to this in this industry. But we still have these perceptions, and Ken alluded to some of the things that we have done. What else? How do we need to evolve? How do we need to act to help and support you in your efforts of representing the value we deliver?
I'm sitting here right now trying to debate whether I want to be nice or want to be nasty. And I don't mean to be nasty. That may be a bad way to phrase it, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Because clearly, I have to tell you that I've had a lot of relationships with, not a lot, but a number of relationships with pharmaceutical companies, some of them more in depth with some than others. And I've always appreciated at every level, and I certainly know that the American Cancer Society and our advocacy affiliate, American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, have appreciated those relationships. And the opportunity to literally be in the room and have the conversations to understand the industry a little bit has been incredibly rewarding, and to see some of the incredibly wonderful things that are done has been very enlightening and very helpful. So, for example, a new drug comes out, and I've had one company, I won't mention the name, I've actually had conversations as the drug is being released and understanding in terms of the cost drivers, shall we say, and the challenges that are faced. But then there's the other side that I think has to be put on the table. And I'm not saying it's my side, my view, it's certainly not the society's view, but it is a view, and it's out there. And, you know, Ken, as I mentioned earlier, has a tremendous amount of experience in Medicare payment issues, and I've sat on the physician fee schedule side of that discussion, and I've seen those costs enter into the Part B payments, and then previously in budget neutrality, take money out of the hands of people caring for patients and the services that are provided. So that's no longer the case, at least as far as the physicians are concerned. But the point I'm driving to is there's obviously an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room, as you all know, are the docs who get on in a public forum and say this is just not acceptable, and that is the cost of the drugs. So with all of the good work, that becomes a message that has to be addressed. It's shown up initially a year ago in the Blood editorial when the 80-some doctors came together. It showed up again at ASCO with Dr. Sawyer's a major plenary address when he talked about it, and it's bound to come up again. And it's a barrier to us understanding how we're going to be able to take combination therapies and move them forward. I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I personally believe that as an industry, there is a response, and this may sound naive, folks, I know what you're probably thinking privately, but there is a responsibility in that black box of understanding the cost driver, the cost that you invest in terms of the research. I'm sort of sitting here thinking about that leaf comment you made. We don't get our drugs from turning over a leaf. Well, we have gotten our drugs from pulling the bark off a yew tree once in the past. So I come from those ages, and that happened. And Taxol is a legendary story in that regard. But the costs you have to invest, the cost of the clinical trials, the failures that you have, and the return on investment that you must do. I have no way of knowing that, and no one else does. And so the industry, in a sense, has a public obligation to be able to do that. Now, I understand, you think I'm incredibly naive, but it is a very real issue, and not to address that, not to say something about it is important. Having said that, the value that these drugs bring to the table is incredible. 2002 or 2001, I forget which year, I started with the society back in 2001. Shortly after I started, I got a news release in my hand that talked about a drug called imatinib. And it talked about how it was an article coming out in the New England Journal. I got a preprint of the article. And I said, wow, this is really impressive. And that's Gleevec. And the world changed overnight for thousands of patients then and now because of that drug and that drug alone. It turned an invariably fatal disease to a cure. If not a cure, I sometimes hesitate to use that word, but let's just say incredibly well controlled for not everyone, but for almost everyone. That's amazing. That sets a hugely high bar. That's an incredible value to the individual, and it's an incredible value to society. When you go, and a couple of years ago, and a young man down in West Palm Beach, Florida, who was driving a hotel van, sees my tag on my bag that says the American Cancer Society, drives me from the airport, drops me off at the hotel late at night, turns to me and says, I want to say thank you to you. I said, why? He said, because you work for the American Cancer Society, and you helped, he knew the story. He said, I'm 18 years old, and I have chronic, or not 18, he said, when I was 18 years old, I had chronic myelogenous leukemia, and I'm 21 years old now, and I can't thank you enough for what you did. And we helped support some of that research in the beginning. We supported the research, you made the drug. And that was the beginning of the story that has continued for a long time. Getting that value equation understood, doing your part to make sure it's fair and reasonable and appropriate, to encourage you to what you do, to produce profits for the people who make your investments, where your return to society has value, and to continue the work you do, making that case and making it effective, I think, is one of the biggest hurdles that the industry faces. So again, I keep coming back to saying, I don't mean to be impolite, but it is the elephant in the room, and I think it's something that we cannot ignore.
Can I just do a real quick follow-up on that? Because
Yes,
it was kind of like the point I was making earlier, and I think it's critically important going forward, given the fact that we do have this explosion of chronic diseases where medicines are going to be the centerpiece of engaging patients and dealing with them. And it just goes back to this mentality of, thinking in silos. We have got to make the value proposition here, not only on the quality side, no question about that, but on the cost side. And the idea here is that we know that there are enormous offsets by appropriate use of medications elsewhere in the system in terms of reductions in hospitalizations, emergency room visits, and so on. So part of our challenge here is to make people understand that, we have this incredible explosion of chronic disease. In the Medicare population, 75% of seniors are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. It's a big population. We've got to make the case, and we can make the case, that says appropriate use of medications, dosage, fills, refills, interactions across different medications, that appropriate use of them actually generates long-term savings in terms of hospitalizations and so on. That we really need to get people to think beyond silos and to think about total cost per person, because we want to invest more in medications to manage chronic disease. We want to make sure that patients have access to these medications. That is the sort of the centerpiece of how we can keep patients healthy and keep them out of the hospital. So we really need to continue, and we've been, certainly in terms of public policy, persistently making the case from a PFCD standpoint that if the goal is really to reduce per person Medicare spending or Medicaid spending or private insurance premiums, that should be your focus, not the inputs to how you generate that trend. Because you're going to see changes in investments over time based on changes in the clinical characteristics of patients that we treat over time. And that's just going to be a natural part of the process. So have a broader eye on the ball on what we're really trying to achieve here, which is better quality, improved longevity, but also slowing the growth in per capita spending overall.
Thank you, Ken. A couple of things that you've mentioned, and I think it's really important. Science is expensive, and to be able to bring medicines that are required today by so many that desperately need them, it's a costly proposition. But I think your point is a really good one. What are those cost substitutes that, because we're bringing these medicines into society, the healthcare system is saving? And we, perhaps, as an industry, haven't made the best case of that, and we're working on that. So we appreciate what you're saying. And please, Leonard, know that we want to hear the truth, and don't worry about being mean or nice. You help us. By listening to you and learning from you, it's very, very helpful.
If I may, and I'm never shy, so it's, and I hope you all don't mind. I appreciate being here. But let me make another, you said something about the value you bring to society, but let me say that there's an important part of this equation in the world that you live in biopharmaceuticals of society bringing value to you.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's not forget that side of the equation. And the fact is that one of the reasons the costs are so high is the incredible difficulty in getting clinical trials, the incredible difficulty in finding those patients, trying to accelerate that process and find ways to make that process work better. So again, we sit at tables where we're now talking about lung cancer master protocols, and the industry is sitting at that table. We're now talking about colorectal cancer master protocols. We're talking about trying to make the national network of cancer cooperative groups work better to serve your needs. We have to work better on interoperability of health information and health information technology so we learn more from those patients in the community. We need to learn, be able to get more patients on clinical trials, make it easier to get on clinical trials, make the cost of those trials less expensive. You've done your part, by the way. I didn't know a couple of years ago whether the industry would go in the era of Tarceva and Iressa, when we had EGFR, what we call TKI inhibitors, when you treat 100 patients you get 10 that benefit. I didn't know whether the industry would continue in that mode because you can maybe make more money treating 100 and just help 10. But now you're in a mode where you're really focusing on finding those 10. So those are things that hopefully will help drive down the cost of this process and make it more efficient, and then we can translate that, and because we're going to have to. That's what's, and society owes you, owes you the fact that they have to do that so you can do your job more effectively and we can get these medicines to patients more quickly and more efficiently and less expensive.
Thank you. It's been a great discussion. I'm going to open it up for our audience if there are any questions that you would like to ask any one of our panelists.
Deirdre, while we're waiting for a question, do you mind if this point around cost of medicines, as the only panelist from the manufacturing side of the business, I think something that we don't often talk about is the efforts that we make within the pharmaceutical industry to control our costs. And so we talk a lot about innovation and research areas, but within our manufacturing facilities and within our supply chain, a lot of what my colleagues do in manufacturing is innovating and looking for new ways to reduce the cost of the materials, to reduce the cost of manufacturing and utilize new technology to do things in more efficient, less costly manners. And more so recently, working on reducing the cost of distribution of those medicines when we're talking about global distribution channels. So we talk about the cost of medicine that's a burden to our patients, but I guess I just wanted to get across the point that within the pharmaceutical industry, we work very hard and are very inspired to reduce the cost of the actual manufacturing process to make sure we have the absolute highest quality medicines, but delivered in a more innovative and efficient way so we can increase the access to medicine globally. So I just wanted to mention that point as well.
And that's a commitment that, as an industry in all of our companies, we're looking at every part of the value chain so that we can be more effective, obviously, in reducing costs and making these processes more efficient, as you've asked us to, Leonard. Any questions? Before you ask your question, if I may, Jessica wanted to make a comment.
Oh, I was just saying, to Jennifer's point, I think that from a patient perspective, patients want to know that beyond the business, that you have their best interests in mind. And so the ongoing theme that I'm seeing today is increased transparency and telling your story, which is just so vital. You know, talking about all the setbacks, the long road that it takes, and that despite losing millions of dollars, you continue to go back to the drawing board because you care so much about patients and finding those cures for them. And I think beyond communicating about the time and the money spent, incorporating that personal element, the personal investment, because I think that people really relate to stories and to passion. And when you're talking about something that you're passionate about, people can really feed off of that. You know, we've all gone into our respective fields for one reason or another, talking about what drives you. You know, Samantha made a point earlier about highlighting each person that is involved every step of the way of the process. I think patients would like to see that. And maybe a medication has made a difference in your life or someone in your family's life, or you've had a personal interaction with a patient who has personally benefited from the medication, and that is what drives you to get up every day out of bed and continue to fight for those cures. So more stories, I think, is really
Thank you,
important.
Jessica. Yes?
My name is Robert Metz, and I work for Horizon Pharma, a small biotech company in the Chicagoland area. And I was on the Hill yesterday with Bio during the legislative day, and there were a lot of questions from the Illinois legislators relative to pharmaceutical value and pricing, especially relative to the hepatitis C issue. And I couldn't agree more that I think we, of course, need to be able to appropriately communicate the value of the biopharmaceutical sector. But as a small biotech company, what would be helpful for me is understanding if there's access to maybe a library of pharma opinions on some of these key points, because as a small biotech company that's had some aggressive, successful growth recently, we're contacted individually, and I would imagine many in this room are contacted for opinions from legislators on certain policy kinds of positions, and it certainly would be helpful for me to have quick and easy access to some elements that we've talked about here even today, but having kind of a unified approach to addressing some of these issues. So it would be valuable from a small biotech perspective, but also I think for the industry would be valuable.
I will ask my panelists to comment, but I would invite you again to go to fromhopetocures.org. There's a significant amount of information that we're making available through PhRMA, the trade association, so that we can all speak with one voice. So that's one resource. And Ken, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and I think you'll find some examples on our website, which is just fightchronicdisease.org. And so we've pulled together a lot of the empirical data on the role that medications play in the overall prevention and management of chronically ill patients, where some of the savings are long-term in terms of the appropriate use of medications in managing these chronically ill patients. I mean, even the Congressional Budget Office, which this is actually somewhat of a miracle that they did this, because they don't usually think this way. But even just looking at medication adherence issues, they found that just that one aspect of appropriate use of medications results in a 25% reduction in non-prescription spending. That's hugely important to get them in that mentality to say that there really are offsets here, which we all know that there are, but they've started to quantify just even a little piece of it. So we're making progress and certainly in making this case, but I'd encourage you to look at our website.
Hi, I'm Amy Rick from the Parkinson's Action Network. I guess my question is really a follow-on to the previous question. In the conversation about cost of drugs and the value of funding NIH, I think often people don't engage in those conversations, and this came up this morning too, until they're sick, until they're appalled by the cost of a drug. We have, I think, an appalling lack of understanding in this country and the therapy development pipeline, and the fact that the federal government funds basic research and how much it costs to develop a therapy at the end stage by industry and get it through FDA. And I think there is, some of the industry efforts are viewed as biased, there's no doubt about that. What can we, I'm coming obviously from the nonprofit perspective, what can we do collectively to raise the level of education and understanding in this country about therapy development? I love, Jennifer, that you're speaking at schools, but that's multiple generations away. And even then, I would guess that, particularly for the researchers on the panel, when you were going through school, it was public outreach and education in your field, I don't believe was, I'm guessing, was not conveyed to you as part of your professional responsibility. And what can we do together to really increase the level, the sophistication level of understanding of what all of us do?
Would you like to comment, Leonard?
I feel like I raised my hand at the auction, you know. I bought it. I don't have an easy answer for you. I think it's an issue that we as the American Cancer Society struggle with, because we do, and particularly at ACS have ongoing conversations with industry in a number of arenas and trying to understand what goes on. So, for example, when Jennifer was commenting, the light bulb went off, because I've had several conversations about sourcing of raw materials, and I'm aware of FDA oversight issues that are really intense, both here and abroad, and making sure that everything's in a regulatory process. And talking about that, the pharma company that I had the conversation with, understanding this was like assembling a 747 or I'm sorry, 787. I'm a little dated in terms of how all these pieces have to come together in order to make something happen. From a thought leader point of view, I think that's really where one of the places you need to concentrate, and I'm sure you are. I have no doubt that the industry is doing that. I wish I had an easy answer to how one educates the public, because I don't have an easy answer to that one. It's a tough, right now as social media progresses, it gets harder and harder to get that educational piece out there, because the world has gone from someone who used to read volumes of newspapers to someone who reads Twitter feeds 140 words, as you know, to actually looking at the Wall Street Journal, if you all have the iPad version, that little thing that has 3 words saying, Ukraine had a protest yesterday, and then pressing the button. And then you decide if you want to go, you understand what I'm saying? It gets much more sound bites. And this is an incredibly, incredibly difficult situation. Having said that, and the comment was made by Jessica, and something that we try to do all the time in our own organization. There are so many stories to tell about success. There are so many, within the medical world, so many people engaged who are seeing these stories, all the way from simple stories. I was over at, I'll say Kaiser Permanente, a story about someone who was encouraged to get a mammogram, all the way to someone who's had life-saving treatment and continues to benefit. So within that, there are people smarter than I who understand how to tell. But you have to tell the complexity of the process. To me, of what you go through to try to get where you are is so overwhelming. Let me just make one additional comment. Just I've been talking about some of the initiatives, and some of you may know about them, may not know about them. Think of many of you. You mentioned you're from a small biotech company. And there are a lot of incredible entrepreneurial companies out there, again, as people in this room know. But this organization is really concentrated on the big side. And the gap in between the university researcher and the small company and the big company is a big gap. And there's an organization, Dr. Andrew Lowe, who's a professor at Harvard, at MIT. I guess that's part of Harvard, but it's at MIT. Has brought together, has written on this issue in Nature and elsewhere, and actually has brought together some pretty smart folks in something called Cancer RX to try to figure out how to bridge that gap. And it started off as being termed the Valley of Death, and then a well-known researcher said called the Valley of Dearth. That period where the university team has a drug that's developed, or a small company has a drug that's developed, and large pharma says enough has been done for us to get interested. So there's movement in that regard within the financial community. I mentioned earlier about clinical trials, but there's also that issue that has to be addressed to try to make this process, again, more simple. But in terms of how one educates, it's a long slog, it's consistent messaging, key points, focus on thought leaders, and I won't, I'm not saying I'm a thought leader, but, frankly, I'm a focus of some education that I've gotten, and I have found that valuable and informative. And I've seen some of the, I consider, excellent work that may not be necessarily directly related to a product that the companies do that has really impressed me, because it's high-quality, evidence-based, science-driven information that is brought together by some of the companies that in their process that I think is really outstanding. So it's a complicated process. Not enough time here to talk more than that, but it's not easy.
Thank you, Leonard. Samantha, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. Similar to Len, I couldn't comment on the best way to educate the public or to advocate. But what I would suggest is that the business model of pharmaceuticals or biotech isn't very well understood. It's one of the few rare businesses where we're talking about the cost of failure. And Jennifer pointed out how we continuously try to improve the cost of failure, if you like. But I think communicating around not just the success stories, which are very inspiring, but I note that you come from the Parkinson's Society, an area where there have been a number of trials that have not succeeded. And these don't get much light of day. They don't get much learnings. The public's not really aware of them. It's almost as if they didn't quite happen. And I can't exactly go into the reasons for that, but I think the public will learn a lot to understand that there is effort going on and that that effort doesn't always come to fruition either. So the business model, the peculiarity of the pharmaceutical business model with this 98% failure rate in the clinic, it's unusual, probably only paralleled by the petrol company, which is not a paradigm that we want to compare with, but compared to the iPhone or the 6 to 9 month cycle time of taking forward a smartphone, it's extremely different, and I'm not sure the public know that.
Deirdre, may I comment on this as well? I thought your question was really interesting, and I actually, in my mind, I kind of was hitting it at 2 levels. So I think as a leader in the industry, you know, we're interacting with people in our community every day, and we are the face of pharma to them. So I think it's really important that we are trying to increase the understanding and the interactions that we have with them in the work that we do. And Jessica mentioned telling our stories, and if they understand the passion that we have. And I do think we all have a personal responsibility to do that. In addition to that more personal community level, I do think the nonprofits play an important role. You mentioned, or somebody mentioned, that a lot of times the industry communication can be perceived as biased. So if we can have a more diversely represented conversation and together determine how can we tell that story, and back to the question asked this morning, before patients are sick and need to understand, can we get more of a public understanding before that time? I do think we can conquer that if we tackle that in a more collective way rather than from each of our individual companies.
I absolutely agree, and it's important for us to recognize that PhRMA, the trade association, has a group of individuals absolutely dedicated to communicating the story, to telling our story as a healthcare group and society. So I would invite you again to contact PhRMA and to lend your voice to the work that you're doing. You have a question, sir?
Deirdre, I'm John Sefrin, a fabulous panel. Thank you all very, very, very much. A couple of points that maybe haven't been made that deserve to be made or to be highlighted. It was just a year ago last January, as Lynn pointed out, that the American Cancer Society published data showing that there now has been a 20% reduction in age-standardized cancer mortality rates. First time that's ever happened in the history of the Republic. What isn't said often enough is that we know that that 20% drop yields the American public a $10 trillion economic value. So when you talk about the cost of a new drug, you need to understand what that means. The second point that I'd like to make is that one thing all of us need to do a better job of, especially those of us representing patients, is to point out that non-communicable diseases will be the #1 health, disease, and disability challenge of this century. Nothing will trump non-communicable diseases as being important to the future of our nation and this world. And the third point I would like to make, just as a friendly suggestion and a modest proposal, we now have something that I thought we wouldn't get before I retired or died, which is a major global commitment to do something about non-communicable diseases, with a high-level meeting of the United Nations in 2011, which basically said we need to set targets because of the importance of this, and we now have, for the first time, a goal of reducing non-communicable diseases by 25% by the year 2025. I think the biopharmaceutical sector, and Ban Ki-moon stood up, and it was in his written testimony in the 13-page political declaration, said, but we can never achieve this without the engagement of the private sector. So I think, and it's probably already happening, clear articulation to the public about how the biopharmaceutical sector will work with the public sector and the not-for-profit sector to make that happen could be a tremendous way for you to burnish your image.
Thank you. Before we close, just want to thank our panelists. We've heard great suggestions. The topic was, how do we communicate the value of biopharmaceutical companies, what we do and what we bring to society? You are all examples of the value that we bring. You exemplify what we can do for patients. Jessica, you've invited us to tell the story of how we impact a patient's life. We have a lot of material in all of our companies about the cost substitutions in society, how we can substitute the cost that is involved in hospitalization by using medicines adequately. We have a lot of education for patients in all of our companies, and some of it is branded, most of it is unbranded, so we need to continue to bring that forth. We have all kinds of information in our websites, in our companies, in the PhRMA website, of hope to cures. But nothing will articulate the value that we bring to society. Nothing will do that as loudly and as clearly as someone's life being touched by the hard work that we all do. We have to tell the stories, and we have to tell that story with one voice. And it takes all of us. Patient advocates, folks that dedicate their life to prevent and manage the lives of people that suffer cancer and other diseases, scientists, people that are in manufacturing, working so hard to ensure that we have quality products in the industry, folks that are really driving that voice about chronic disease. 75% of the cost of healthcare is chronic disease. If we can help you, Ken, manage that, we have more space in healthcare to bring great innovation products for the diseases of today, but particularly for those that we don't even know, so that we can continue to bring that new generation of scientists to imitate Samantha in looking for that hope for so many. But it does take all of us. Jessica, thank you for your challenge. We commit to you that we won't stop the fight, we won't stop working, we won't stop going in and trying to find the new cures and bring good, trustworthy information to those that will provide the care. And that's our commitment. And we will also tell the stories of the people that we impact. Thank you all very much. Thank you.